Western Spring Television. Ours it is.
Good evening and welcome to Spring Global on Western Spring Television. Now the headlines. At least 155 people have been injured after two trains collide on outskirts of Barcelona. Ethiopia restores power supply to Mekelle 2 years after war broke out in Tigray region. 25 people arrested in raids across Germany on suspicion of plotting to overthrow the government. My name is Damilola Raphael. At least 155 people have been injured after two trains collided on the outskirts of Barcelona. The crash, which occurred today, took place at a station in Spain's northeastern Catalonia region. Local media reported that the trains had been traveling in the same direction and collided while one was parked at the station. Catalan police are investigating how the incident occurred. Emergency officials wrote on Twitter that the crash happened at the Manresa station, about 12 kilometers from the city center. Writing on Twitter, emergency services said 150 people were in a mild condition and 5 others had been left in a less serious condition. They added that 3 people had been transferred to the hospital. United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Washington has neither encouraged nor enabled Ukraine to strike targets inside Russia. He was speaking shortly after Moscow accused Kiev of carrying out drone attacks on 3 Russian airfields, 2 of them hundreds of miles from Ukraine. Ukraine has not commented on the issue. Speaking alongside him, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin stressed that the U.S. would not prevent Ukraine from developing its own long-range strike capability. Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly warned the U.S. and its allies not to cross red line by supplying long-range weapons to Ukraine.
We have neither encouraged nor enabled the Ukrainians to strike inside of Russia, but the important thing is to understand what Ukrainians are living through every day with the ongoing Russian aggression against their country and our determination to make sure that they have in their hands, along with many other partners around the world, the equipment that they need to defend themselves, to defend their territory, to defend their freedom.
We'll also continue to find ways to further integrate our defense industrial bases in the years ahead. And we agreed to enhance trilateral defense cooperation and to invite Japan to integrate into our force posture initiatives in Australia.
In the meantime, Russian Defense Ministry has released images which claim to show Moscow's forces training at a facility in Belarus. A statement released by the ministry says the servicemen from Russia's western military district are conducting a training exercise for a cleanup in a residential area, with a simulation town being constructed especially for the drills. It comes as Belarus says it will move military equipment and security forces as part of checks on its response to possible terrorist threats. Meanwhile, political consultations between Turkey and Russia will be held in Istanbul on Thursday and Friday to discuss regional issues. The Turkish Foreign Ministry said delegations headed by Turkish Deputy Foreign Minister Sedat Onal and his Russian counterpart Sergei Vershinin will address the Black Sea grain export deal, as well as regional issues such as Syria, Libya, and Palestine. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu announced the forthcoming meeting, saying engagement between the two countries carries on and the exchange of views continues not only on Ukraine but also on other regional issues. Ankara has repeatedly called on Kiev and Moscow to end the war through negotiations. Elsewhere, Ethiopia has restored power supply to Mekelle, the capital of the northern Tigray state, where federal troops fought rebels in a 2-year civil war that ended last month. Residents in the city are now enjoying full resumption of electricity after supply was disconnected for more than a year. The state-affiliated Fana broadcast quoted a spokesman of the state-owned Ethiopian Electric Power as saying that power had been restored after repair on a high-voltage line. State-run telecommunications firm Ethio Telecom has also restored services in Shire Town and surrounding areas. Power and telecommunications services were disrupted after war broke out in the Tigray region in November 2020. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, United Nations Special Envoy for Syria, Guy Pedersen, has held talks in Damascus with Syria's Foreign Minister Faisal Mikdad, warning that close to 15 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance. Mr. Pedersen said the status quo in Syria should not really be in anyone's interest. He added that there was a need to look at the situation of refugees and the internally displaced.
Syria doesn't need more war, it needs peace, and it needs a political process. Today we went through the whole range of issues in Security Council Resolution 2254, and of course also the economic challenges that Syria is facing. Close to 15 million people in need of humanitarian assistance is not something we should be accepting. So I have said that the status quo in Syria is really not something that should be in anyone's interest. We need to address these issues. We need to look at the situation for the refugees, for the internally displaced. Today also a discussion about the detainees, the abductees and the missing. There are so many issues in Syria that need to be handled and to be sorted out.
Turning to the United States, Democrats have cemented their control of the Senate by winning a bitterly fought seat in Georgia. Raphael Warnock fended off Republican challenger Herschel Walker in a race that had been left undecided after last month's midterm elections. President Joe Biden's party now holds the upper chamber of Congress by 51 to 49. The result caps a disappointing round of midterm election results for the Republicans. The party underperformed expectations last month by winning only a slender majority in the U.S. House of Representatives.
It is my honor to utter the four most powerful words ever spoken in a democracy. The people have spoken.
China is lifting its most severe COVID policies, including forcing people into quarantine camps just a week after landmark protests against the strict controls. While announcing new freedoms today, China's National Health Commission said people with COVID can now isolate at home rather than in state facilities if they had mild or no symptoms. They also no longer need to show tests for most venues and can travel more freely inside the country. Citizens have expressed relief but also concern about the sudden changes. You are watching Spring Global on Western Spring Television. We will be right back after this break.
Would you like a TV station that breaks the barriers of your TV screen? A TV station that brings infotainment to your forefront, breaking the conceptual fourth wall. Giving you television that is personal to you and your everyday life. Indigenous broadcasting for every man, cutting across the shackles of age, class, and language. With the best of equipment in digitized broadcasting. At Western Spring Television, your television experience has never been this magical.
We'll bring you the best in news and programs, breaking news to you as it drops from where it drops.
Talk shows that keep you glued to your seats, sports programs not void of in-depth analysis, entertainment programs cutting across all ages, political analysis with all its accompanying controversies, social responsibility because we care. Western Nigeria gave us our first feel of television. Western Spring Television is taking us to the next level.
You're welcome back. 25 people have been arrested in raids across Germany on suspicion of plotting to overthrow the government. The German reports say the group of far-right and ex-military figures planned to storm the parliament building and seize power. A 71-year-old German man referred to as a prince called Heinrich XIII is alleged to have been central to their plans. According to federal prosecutors, he is one of 2 alleged ringleaders amongst those arrested across 11 German states. A court in Argentina has sentenced Vice President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner to 6 years in jail for corruption in a case that has shaken the country. Fernández was found guilty of fraudulent administration over the awarding of public works contracts to a friend. But she is unlikely to serve jail time as she has some immunity via her government roles and is expected to launch a lengthy appeals process. She has also been banned from public office for life, but will continue in her role as vice president while the case goes through higher courts. Speaking after the verdict, Fernández said the charges against her were politically motivated. In Africa, a Mozambican court has sentenced the son of a former president and others to prison for their role in the Tuna Bonds corruption scandal. Ex-President Armando Guebuza's son, Ndambi Guebuza, and 2 former heads of intelligence, Gregorio Leo and Antonio de Rosario, each got 12 years behind bars. 8 of their co-accused were convicted and sentenced to between 10 and 12 years. A total of 19 people had been charged with blackmail, embezzlement, and money laundering over their alleged roles in Mozambique's biggest financial scandal. 8 have been acquitted for lack of evidence. The scandal involves the country borrowing more than $2 billion from international banks, much of it without the knowledge or approval of the country's parliament, triggering an economic crisis. Head of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, says humanity has become a weapon of mass extinction. He said this at the start of a high-level nature summit in Canada, where governments are meeting to agree targets to reverse the loss of nature. Mr. Guterres said there was a chance to stop the destruction which has put 1 million species at risk of extinction. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said there was a need to save nature from human destruction. In Montreal, nearly 200 countries will try to agree on a way to put the world on the path to restoring nature by the end of the decade.
By 2030, we must halt and reverse biodiversity loss.
Kenya plans to abolish boarding schools next year for students up to grade 9, about 14 to 15 years, which includes primary and junior secondary schools. Education Principal Secretary Belio Kipsang told a head teachers conference that parents would have to take their children to day schools. He said the government had made the decision to allow children to be under the care of their parents or guardians. Children from nomadic pastoralist communities will, however, be exempt from the rules. A former Iranian president has made rare public comments praising anti-government protesters and urging the authorities to heed their demands before it is too late. Mohammad Khatami says the beautiful slogan of woman, life, freedom showed Iranian society was moving towards a better future. He also criticized arrests of students in the security forces crackdown. The comments came in a statement to mark Students' Day. Students have been at the forefront of the unrest that began in mid-September following the death in custody of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old woman who was detained by morality police for allegedly wearing her hijab improperly. The women-led protests have spread to more than 150 cities and 140 universities in all 31 of the country's provinces and are seen as one of the most serious challenges to the Islamic Republic since the 1979 revolution. The World Bank says the external debt stock of low-income and middle-income countries doubled over the past decade to $9 trillion at the end of 2021. Last year, the debt rose by 12% to a record $860 billion in 2020 from $770 billion in 2019. President World Bank David Malpass disclosed this during the launch of the International Debt Report 2022. According to Mr. Malpass, the bank's latest debt statistics report showed that the debt crisis in the world's poorest countries is intensifying. He added that this had made debt restructuring harder. And now to some sports stories. Belgian playmaker Eden Hazard has retired from international football at the age of 31. Hazard, who is an attacking midfielder or winger, made his Belgian debut in 2008 at the age of 17 and went on to win 126 caps, scoring 33 goals. His decision comes after Belgium were knocked out of the World Cup in the group stages. Hazard was part of the squads that reached the semi-finals of the 2018 World Cup, losing 1-0 to France, and went on to defeat England to finish third. Novak Djokovic will play in January's Adelaide International, a year after being deported from Australia because of his COVID-19 vaccination status. The Serb, who has won a record 9 Australian Open titles, is set to compete at the first Grand Slam of the year after his visa ban was overturned. The event begins on the 1st of January in Adelaide, with the Australian Open starting 15 days later in Melbourne. As well as world number 5 Djokovic, there will be 3 other top 10 men's players in Adelaide, with Felix Auger-Aliassime, Daniil Medvedev, and Andrei Rublev also competing. Nigerian singer Oladapo Oyebanji, popularly known as D'banj, has been arrested and detained by the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, ICPC. According to reports, the singer was arrested after ICPC operatives moved on him and forced him to surrender. D'banj was arrested on suspicion of fraudulently diverting funds intended for the N-Power project into his personal account. The N-Power project is an empowerment program set up by the Nigerian government in 2016 to tackle issues like youth unemployment and increase social development. It was gathered that ICPC rejected the singer's request for bail on the grounds that they could not rely on him to appear at his trial if he is released. Before we end Spring Global, here is a recap of our top stories. At least 155 people have been injured after 2 trains collided on the outskirts of Barcelona. Ethiopia has restored power supply to Mekelle, the capital of the northern Tigray state, where federal troops fought rebels in a 2-year civil war that ended last month. 25 people have been arrested in raids across Germany on suspicion of plotting to overthrow the government. You can follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Western Spring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Western Spring Television. I am Damilola Raphael. Thank you for listening. Good evening.
Can you imagine the feeling when you get your news as they break with facts and clarity? Our news are reported as it is.
In Africa, and all those who masterminded the way it happened will have to pay a price.
Enjoy Western programs, projecting culture and tradition to the world. Brought to you as the break and recapped every hour for your update.
You must never forget the sacrifices of the heroes of Nigeria's democracy.
Produced and brought to you in a unique way never before seen.
Western Spring.
Western Spring.
And Western Spring Television. Television is coming home in your color and culture.
The 1914 Amalgamation Treaty is synonymous to the birth of Nigeria. Frederick Lugard, a British Army captain and an outlaw who struck gold in Africa, became the instrument used by destiny to make it happen. The amalgamation of Nigeria was designed for economic reasons by the colonial administration to offset Northern Protectorate budget deficit by Southern Protectorate surplus returns. The amalgamation had ad initio created imbalance in the economic political structure of Nigeria and was responsible for the persistent hiccups in the efforts to forge a united country till today. Nigeria's amalgamation was labeled as the mistake of 1914 by native northern conservatives who neither wanted it nor contributed anything significant to its sustenance. Western Spring Television identifies with Amalgamation Treaty of 1914 as a watershed event in history.